So, the talk, of course, is the challenge of our time, humanism in the age of Trump. And one of the things I'll be talking about is what exactly does it mean to be a humanist in 2018 with Donald Trump as the President of the United States. Now, one of the things that happened when I first presented this talk, the very first time I gave it was from the Humanists of Greater Boston. And they actually had some people who protested. They thought that that was wrong. They didn't like the concept, the premise of the talk, that something about Trumpism was antithetical to humanism. So I realized that maybe I better start off with some definitions. So I've got up here the American Humanist Association definition of humanism. It's a progressive philosophy of life that without anything supernatural holds that we have an ability and a responsibility to lead ethical lives that have some meaning to them. And there are some other parts. If you take a look at humanism and its aspiration, which is commonly known as the Humanist Manifesto number 3, and it's the current articulation when they get all the muckety-mucks in humanism together. This was a written statement that everybody could agree upon. That kind of summed up what humanism is. And number one, and the type's a little small, I think. The screen's kind of small, but number one, knowledge of the world is derived by observation and experimentation and rational analysis. We think that science and reason are really the best ways of understanding the world that we live in. Number two, that humans are a part of nature and that we evolved along with the rest of life on this planet. And that number three is that our ethics come from human need, as tested by experience. What does that mean? It means that the ethical thing to do is the thing that benefits humanity and society as a whole. And that fulfillment comes from participating in the service of humane ideals, that we feel good when we do good. And that's how we can find meaning in our lives. The next two parts, that we're social by nature, we find meaning in relationships, and finally, that by working to benefit society maximizes our individual happiness. So one thing I will say is that humanism is not necessarily coextensive with progressive socialistic policies. Most of us who identify as humanists are going to identify as being liberal. Some of us are going to identify as being very, very liberal. But I'm going to maintain that it is possible to support a number of different conservative positions using arguments that are based upon humanist values. That if the position that somebody's advocating for is supported by some facts, and you're taking a rational approach, and if you're motivated to try to benefit society as a whole, all of humanity, all of the planet, all of the living things, if that's what you're motivated for, then I think that that's something that's supportable. So I think that Bertrand Russell perhaps summed it up best in his essay, What I Believe. And that is that the good life is inspired by love and guided by knowledge. And that I think that if you have a policy, if it is inspired by love, and if it is guided by knowledge, I think that you've articulated a humanist policy. So let's talk a little bit about the definition of Trumpism. So the policies advocated by Donald Trump, especially those involving a rejection of current political establishment and the vigorous pursuit of American national interests. By the way, this is Collins English Dictionary. It's in there. And a secondary definition is a controversial or outrageous statement that's attributed by Donald Trump, and we're going to look at just a few of those. This is a statement, of course, as he's making up a story about Muslims in New Jersey who are cheering when the World Trade Center came down. Now, there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that this happened. But this is a pretty good thing to do if your motivation is to stir up hate and to try to divide people and to get them to vote on fear. So I don't think that's a statement that is either inspired by love or guided by knowledge. Neither of those two apply. So of course this is the famous statement that he made when he announced his candidacy in the escalator speech. And this is this comment that he made during one of the Republican debates, referencing Carly Fiorina. Look at that face. Would anyone vote for that? Can you imagine that, the face of our next president? And we've got, I think, an outright assault on truth. Now, the first time that I gave this talk was in this late spring. And in May of 2018, he had just gone over the 3,000 lie threshold. Okay, that from the time of his inauguration until May, so about a year and 4 months, 1 1/3 years, he had managed to do 3,000 lies. So I checked it just 3 months later, and it already jumped up to 4,200 lies during that time period. He'd gone during that time period from averaging about 6.5 lies a day to over 13 false statements. Now, the source of this is the Washington Post. They have a fact checker, and you can look at it. I haven't tried to update it in the last couple of months, but the number keeps climbing. And you've got this Orwellian statement that he made a couple months ago where he says, just remember what you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening. Just stick with us. Don't believe the crap you see from these people, the fake news. So we've got this attack on our institutions of information, where the press is called the enemy of the people. And what he is very evidently attempting to do is to create general public distrust in all sources of information, so that people don't know what to believe. And this is how demagogues tighten their grasp. I counterpose this with the Orwellian quote, of course. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. So it is some scary stuff. Let's talk about how we're supposed to feel about all this. Hopefully I've made the case that Trumpism is in fact antithetical to humanism. I'm not going to draw on it any further, but I understand that sometimes when I give these talks, there are people who have life stances or value systems that are different than humanism. And that's okay. Those are also valid belief systems. But I will tell you that this talk is really not intended for those with a different value system. Anyway, this photograph was taken to me at 6:52 a.m. November 8th, 2016. It is the last known photo of me before the world turned upside down. And how do I look in the picture?
Your hair is not so long.
Happy? No. Yeah. So the number one response is tired. And I was tired. And the reason why I was tired is because I happen to be a civil litigator. I'm a consumer advocate. And I had just finished a jury trial of a case against a Bridgeport, Connecticut car dealership the day before. And jury trials are exhausting things. We took the verdict on that Monday, November 7th. And we won, which was nice. And I took election day off. But before I talk about election day, I'm going to talk about what happened as I was leaving the courthouse. Because as I walked out of the courthouse, I looked to my right and I saw a photograph of Barack Obama and Joseph Biden. And I was thinking about what my schedule was in the next couple months, and I realized I probably was not going to be stepping foot into another courthouse until after the next president had been inaugurated. And I thought about the very, very first time that I ever walked into a courthouse and I saw the photographs of Ronald Reagan and George Bush, which gives you some idea of how long I've been practicing law. And I always paid attention as the presidents rotated over the years and new ones came up. And I remember how excited and proud I felt when I saw Barack Obama up there for the first time 10 years ago. And I thought about that, and I also thought about how I was going to feel when I saw a woman up there the next time I come in. And I stopped and I looked, and I stood there for a good 10, 15 seconds looking at those photographs, thinking about what it was going to be like when we have our first woman president. And now, I understood that was not a done deal, because I'm one of those people that realized when Nate Silver said that Hillary Clinton had an 80% chance of winning, that meant that about 1 out of 5 times that she wasn't going to. One way to look at the analysts in this is that if the weatherman says there's an 80% chance of rain and it doesn't rain, that doesn't mean the weatherman did a bad job. What you have to do is you have to take a look at all of the times that the weatherman says that there's an 80% chance of rain. And if the weatherman over a course of a couple years said 80% chance of rain 100 times, if it rained 100 times, that's not a good weatherman. Okay? You'd expect it to be about 80 times. Okay? And there really was about a 1 out of 5 chance. And I understood that. I knew that was a really distinct possibility. Now, in addition to being a humanist, I'm also a practicing Stoic. And some people may be familiar with Stoicism, and I say that not glibly Stoic with a small s, but actually referring to the ancient philosophy of the Greeks and Romans, which is enjoying quite a resurgence lately. And one of the things I like about it is it's entirely consistent with humanism, and what it does is it teaches people to find greater resilience in the face of adversity, and also causes them to find greater happiness in regardless of what may befall you. And one of the exercises that the ancient Stoics used to do, and that I still do to this day, is an exercise called premeditatio malorum. And premeditatio malorum means basically to think about bad stuff that might happen. And I don't spend hours dwelling on this, but every day I spend about a minute thinking about something bad that might happen. And sometimes it's something real minor, like having a horrible presentation tonight, for example. Or it might be something like something really, really awful happening to me or to a loved one. Why do we do that? Why would you spend time thinking about that? There are 2 reasons. Number one is research shows that when people spend time doing this, that they wind up appreciating the good things that happen in their lives more. And the other reason why this has a benefit is because when people engage in this exercise, bad stuff is going to happen to all of us. And it's going to happen a lot. And then when you do this, you may find yourself better prepared to deal with it, with greater resilience, because you've thought things through. You've thought about things that may go wrong, so it's not a huge surprise. And in the days and weeks and months leading up to the election, I engaged in the premeditatio malorum exercise of thinking about what life was going to be like if Donald Trump became the President of the United States. Even though I didn't think it would happen, I knew it was a possibility. And I have to tell you, I went to some really, really dark places when I had these thoughts. It was kind of a combination of a Cormac McCarthy novel and The Walking Dead. That's how bad it was. I have a friend, Steve knows him, Paulo Ribeiro, and we used to actually compare notes on this, where he would say that I've got these visions of people huddled around in the cold, around 55-gallon drums, and we're cooking coffee over a fire in the drum. And I would say, wow, you're lucky. And your Trump apocalypse, you have coffee. You have clean water. He says, no, we're talking about used grounds with dirty swamp water. And I said, okay, then maybe we're both on the same page. But I really thought it was going to be bad. And the night of the election, so my daughter Leanne is here. She lives here in Providence, and my son Eric lives in Boston. And my wife lives with me in Glastonbury, Connecticut, near Hartford. And she went up to bed. She just says, "Oh, just tell me in the morning." You know, she couldn't deal with it. And so I'm watching. I'm texting both Leanne and Eric as the night's going on. And I'm watching as John King is desperately looking for votes in suburban Detroit and Milwaukee on CNN. And then Pennsylvania was called for Trump, and I realized, wow, that's it. And I'm just watching, and I'm just trying to get my arms around this, and I'm thinking, okay, this is really serious. Things are going to be different. And I'm sitting in the dark room watching, and all of a sudden, the TV goes off. And I think it started already. I said, I really thought it would have to be in an office for at least 10 minutes before the complete collapse of society. What happened was the cable company had chosen 2 a.m. that night to do a reboot. And they did. So I looked around and says, oh, okay, so the world's not over yet. And this photograph, of course, was taken this morning. And I was hopeful. I was really hopeful that morning. I took the day off because I just finished the trial, and my wife Linda drove me to the poll. She stopped off to vote on her way to work, and then I decided I was just going to walk home. It was about a 3-minute walk, or excuse me, about a 3-mile walk. And it took a long time, and I was enjoying it. It was a brisk day. I saw a guy who was kind of famous in our town for sitting on a bench and waving the cars as they go by, and I stopped and talked to him. And I said, yeah, I just voted. He said, is there an election? I said, yeah, there's an election today. It just inconceivable that not everybody knew. But I think that a lot of the people that voted for Trump were probably about as informed as this guy was. Let's take a look at some of the people who I think supported this. And as we talk about the next topic, which is how do we find common ground and mutual respect with Trump supporters. Now, in the months coming up to the election, I remember I had a conversation with my mother. My mother is living, she's 81 years old, and she told me that she was having trouble. She lives in Pennsylvania, by the way, so she's in a swing state. And she said, I'm really having trouble because some of my friends tell me that they're going to vote for Trump. I says, how do you deal with that, Danny? I said, oh, that's not a problem. I said, so confident I was. I said, because somebody who would vote for Trump wouldn't be my friend. They wouldn't have the qualities or the characteristics that I would call that person a friend. Let's take a look at some photographs. These photos came from the time period right after the Affordable Care Act was passed, and that was the emergence of the Tea Party. And you have got this person there. You know, one of the things that people were pushing for was a public option. And this person did. I think there's a typo there. I think there's supposed to be an L there. Let's do another. Yeah, and some of them, you know, they really were. They wanted to make English our official language. It's and I before we accept signs at Tea Party rallies, I suppose. Let's see another. Keep government out of Medicaid. Damn it. It'd take a while to unpack that one, I think. And here's.
Oh wow.
Okay, and we have just one more. Okay, euthanasia with your grandma. So you know, these guys were among the supporters, and who remembers seeing signs like this on things like that on Facebook? And raise your hand if you ever liked or shared something like that. Says a few of us, a lot of us did. If you ever saw it and you laughed, I did too. I'll admit it. And here's the thing, okay? These people were in pain. These people were in real, serious pain. And instead of trying to understand what was causing that pain, we laughed at it. We mocked it. And I don't know about you, but nobody has ever convinced me to change my mind about anything by mocking me or laughing at me. There have been times where people have convinced me to change my mind. And I've thought back on some of those instances. And there are certain things that I've noticed that the person who persuaded me was somebody who I had gotten to know. It was somebody who I had come to trust, and it was somebody who I respected, and it was somebody who I felt respected me. And we're not going to be persuading anybody by posting this type of stuff and mocking that. Because we've got to understand where people are at. Now, I want to be fair about who the Trump supporters are, because they're not all Tea Party people, and they're not, and a lot of them can write and spell quite well. We've got people who are financially motivated. A lot of people, I talked about how there are other value systems besides humanism. And I remember when I was a very, very young lawyer, and I was in one of my co-workers' offices, and we were talking about some election or other. I don't even remember what it was. And I wanted the Democrat, he wanted the Republican, and we're talking about it back and forth. He said, Dan, let me stop you right there. Let me explain something to you. I am going to vote for whichever candidate is going to result in the lowest taxes for me to pay. I was floored by this. I was naive. I really was naive at the time. It just didn't occur to me that somebody would have values like that are completely 100% financially motivated. That's not a humanist value at all. But not everybody has those values. And that's where a lot of people were coming from. They were thinking about the economics, and they believed that they would make more money. And a lot of people's 401ks have been doing very well with the deregulation and the tax cuts. Conservative supporters of Israel are another big category of people. We've got people who are concerned about national security, financial security, and personal safety. And a lot of them, I think, are some of the folks you saw holding the signs, people like that. People who are influenced by the types of half-truths and untruths and scare tactics that divide people and cause them to vote because they're scared. We've got evangelicals. We've got people who are loyal Republicans who are not going to vote for somebody named Clinton no matter what. And it doesn't matter who is on the ticket opposite them. They're going to hold their nose and they're going to do it because they're just not going to accept a Democrat and certainly not a Clinton. We've got the ultra right wing, and of course we have the people that Hillary Clinton famously called the basket of deplorables, the alt-righters, the Nazis, the Klansmen, and people like that who find somebody very close to their worldview when you're talking about Donald Trump. So, I thought a lot about this, and I thought a lot about how I had felt about the Tea Party people and how upset they were. And I remember in particular watching TV, watching the news and watching a woman. She said, "I just want my country back." And I remember I just completely dismissed her because I thought, "Oh, you're just a racist. We've got a black man who's elected president, and you just feel that that's completely outside of the norm, and that's the only reason why you're rejecting him." And I think that there's some validity to that observation with a lot of the people who were opposed to Barack Obama and a lot of people who supported Donald Trump. But whether she's well-informed or not, she had this misconception that somebody who did not share her values was running the country. And while I think that it was largely fueled by misinformation, a lot of it deliberate by Fox News and others, it was a legitimate view, and we really hadn't tried to understand where she was coming from. About 2 or 3 weeks after the election, I received a call from a friend of mine. His name is Craig, and he, like myself, is a consumer protection lawyer. He had grown up in Chicago. He and his family attended a humanistic Jewish organization while he was in Chicago. And I remember when his father had died, and I had sent him a humanist version of a traditional Jewish prayer that one would say over the dead, and he was really appreciative of that. And when he wound up getting married, he asked me if I would go to North Carolina and officiate. And he had moved to North Carolina a couple of years before that because he'd gotten divorced, and his wife had gone back to her hometown in North Carolina with their 2 young boys. And he wanted to be close to his children, so that's why he relocated. So he and I had developed a little bit of a bond over the years, and I did officiate at their wedding as a humanist celebrant. And he called me and he said, I'm really having a hard time. He'd gone to a mid-sized firm, and he said that a lot of the people that he worked with, that he had considered to be his friends, a lot of whom I had met at the wedding, had voted for Trump and were happy about the results of the election. And he said, you know, how do I go to work? How do I face these people? How do I work with them? And I thought about this a little bit. And do you remember the answer I gave to my mother when she asked me the same question? You know, I wasn't as dismissive this time because I had really been forced to reflect on this a bit. And this is what I said. I said, you know, Craig, if you had been born in their household, and if you had had their parents, and if you had had the same genetic composition that these people had, and if you had been raised the same way, and if you'd been exposed to the same things, and you'd watched the same television programs and read the same books and read the same news articles and had been exposed to the same ideas and had been exposed to all the same influences that they had had, if you had their genetic makeup and if you'd been exposed to the things that they'd been exposed to, almost all of which is completely outside of their choice, of course, you would feel exactly the same way that they would. And the reason why is because if you were born them and you'd lived their lives, you would be them. You would be them. Aren't we all really organic beings that have genetic dispositions that are acted upon by outside influences and stimuli and the hormones and the chemicals that are going through our body? Now, we're fortunate because we get to come to programs like this and let this be the type of thing that influences us. We get to go to UU programs and things like that, and we receive all the time messages of inclusiveness, messages of love, and messages of understanding. But not everybody has that. And that if you understand this, you know, mostly people who are supporting bad things don't think they're supporting bad things. And I really believe that a lot of people who act in a racist way don't think that they're acting in a racist way. They don't realize that they're being racist. And if one thinks about that, then it may be easier to meet the supporters where they are and to interact with them in a way that enables us to be an influence on them. Somebody that they can learn to know, somebody whose opinion they can learn to value, somebody who they respect, and somebody who they believe respects them. And if we do those things, if we try to interact in that way as opposed to laughing at people or dismissing them and saying you're not worth the time, then perhaps we'll be better able to interact and indeed to have a positive influence. Now, I'm not naive. I think that there are some people that are beyond being approached that way. There are very few that I think I would want to give up on completely. But I do firmly believe that other approaches will not work. If anything can work, it's this. And it takes a lot, and it takes a lot of positive influences to outbalance a lifetime of misinformation and hate. But I do believe it's possible. I mentioned the Stoicism before, and I'm going to give you one of my favorite quotes from Marcus Aurelius, who is one of the, his statues, I think this very statue is actually on the Brown campus. It says, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. Not of the same blood or birth, but of the same mind and possessing a share of the divine. And so none of them can hurt me. No one can implicate me in their ugliness. Nor can I feel angry at my brother or hate him. We were born to work together like feet, hands, and eyes, like the two rows of teeth, upper and lower. To obstruct each other is unnatural. To feel anger at someone, to turn your back on him, these are obstructions. Now this comes from the book Meditations, which is one of the most influential books in all of history. He actually wrote this as a private diary to himself, and it's been something that has been very influential for millennia. Bill Clinton is one of many who have stated that it's one of his favorite books. So, now that we've talked a little bit about how are we to relate with the Trump supporters, let's talk about two other questions. How are we supposed to cope in the face of all that's happening around us? And the second question, or the third question actually, that I promised I was going to address is what do we do about it now? And I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview that the answer to those two questions is the same answer. Now, first, when it comes to, I'm going to throw another Stoic at you, and then I'm done with the Stoicism, I promise you. But Epictetus had one of the most profound insights of all of the ancient philosophers, and this is something that has come to really have a tremendous influence on our society in many, many, many fields, and it's called the dichotomy of control. And it says this, that happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within your control, and some things are not. So, when you can control something, then by all means, control it in a way that's good, in a way that benefits society, that benefits you. But when you can't control it, when something's happening, and you don't have the ability to change what's happening, there's one thing that you can control, and that's how you react to it. Okay? Now sometimes that's easier said than done, but I think it's easier said for some people than it is for others. But this concept, does this sound familiar to anybody, by the way? Something more common? What is it?
Serenity prayer.
This is the source of the serenity prayer. And people who are familiar with Eastern philosophy and Buddhism are also going to recognize a lot of this, that there's a lot of similarity, that you can't, that you can't control what's going to happen, but you can't control what your reaction to that is going to be. And this was influential it really forms the underpinning of logotherapy and rational emotive behavioral therapy, which are the two precursors to cognitive behavioral therapy, which is widely recognized as one of the most successful of the various types of talk therapy that we have. And it was also very influential to Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning. Now, if by the way, all the books and writings that I mentioned are going to be up on the screen at the end, so if you want to take out your phone and take a photo of it, you can, so you don't have to write any of this down. Most people here probably know about Viktor Frankl, but for the benefit of any who may not, I'll say a little bit about him. Viktor Frankl was Sigmund Freud's protege, and he was a world-renowned psychiatrist living in Austria in the years leading up to World War II. He was Jewish. He was married with children, and he had two elderly parents who lived nearby him. He was given the opportunity to get a visa for himself and his wife and his children to come to the United States and escape from the storm that he understood was about to befall Europe. And he decided not to do it. He decided to stay. The reason why he decided to stay was because his parents would not have been able to leave. And he was concerned that they would not be able to cope without his help. Whether his decision was right or wrong, it ended tragically for everybody. His entire family, his wife, his children, his parents were all killed in the Holocaust. And he wound up in Auschwitz. Now, because he's a medical doctor, he was put to work. And he survived. And he attributed his survival. And he also observed what other people had done that enabled them to survive. And he wrote about it in this book, Man's Search for Meaning. And what he observed was that the people who were able to get through it, by and large, were people who had something to live for. that they had a purpose, that they had something to do, and that they were able to focus on that. And one of the quotes is, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Now, when we think about Viktor Frankl and Auschwitz, we realize that maybe there are worse places to be than in the United States of America during the Trump presidency. And yes, there are terrible similarities between what's happening here and what was happening in Europe during the early years of the emergence of fascism, and we need to be vigilant to that. But I think that while we do so, we also must be mindful of this wisdom. And go ahead and do the next slide. So then the question is, what do we do now? So bearing in mind that this wisdom that we've received, let's focus on the things that we can control. Let's focus on the things that are within our power. And by focusing on that, then maybe we'll be able to better find some happiness and fulfillment as we're going through this very difficult period that we're living in. And I've got a few specific things that I'd like to suggest in that regard. Take care of yourself first. This is not going to be over anytime soon. And we really do need to do that. So, you know the adage, put on your own oxygen mask first, right? And it applies in all things. So let us, at the very least, do that. Number two, let's keep some perspective, because not all is bad. Not all is bad. I have Steven Pinker's book, Enlightenment Now, The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. And has anybody here read it? A lot of people. Did you have a book discussion on it, or just people were drawn to it? Okay, just drawn to it? So I don't know about you, but I had not felt so optimistic about the world since the election. After I read that book, it's the most optimistic I felt. And what Pinker does in this book is he talks about he takes every imaginable measurement of human well-being, from infant mortality to extreme poverty to violence to the number of people who are killed in wars and so forth. And we think that things are really, really bad. But the reason why we think it's really bad, and this is Pinker's premise, is because of something called the availability bias, where we see bad stuff in the news because if it bleeds, it leads, right? And we focus on that, and that's what we think about. But if you take a look at the statistics over time, of each of these measurements of human well-being, you'll see that things have actually gotten much, much better over time, and they're continuing to get much, much better over time. Hans Rosling just came out with I haven't read it, so I'm not going to recommend it, but I understand that he wrote, I've seen his TED Talks on the same thing, where he shows that many, many measurements of human well-being are actually much better than they've ever been before, and they're continuing to improve. So you may think, well, we'll tell that to the refugees in Syria, but if you take a look at the number of people who are refugees right now and compare it to other times in history, including 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years, it's the lowest it's ever been. And we don't think that because we're focusing, as we should, on things that require improvement, but we shouldn't let ourselves be subsumed into that. My personal view is it's that type of thinking that led to Trump becoming president. When you take a look at who the two populist candidates, you had Bernie on the left and Trump on the right, and they were both candidates for major change. And then you had Hillary Clinton, who was a candidate for incremental improvement. But if people have this preconception that the world is just completely screwed up and the only way to make it better is to completely tear it down and build it back up again, well, that's a problem. Because when you tear everything down, then everything's down. And if things are really improving steadily, then perhaps the better course is to work on that and to look at the things that we're doing that have caused this improvement and to double down on that and to do more of that. And what Pinker says is that the reasons for this are reason, science, humanism, and progress. Essentially, the products of the Enlightenment are the cause for that. So things are not necessarily as bad as we think they may be. Now, I know that the immediate thing that a lot of people are going to think when I say something like that, well, did you see what the UN had to say about the climate last week? And yeah, I did, and it's concerning. And Pinker does address that, and he talks about it as, and I think the right perspective, it is a problem, and it is a problem that must be addressed. And let's focus on how to address it. You know, and there are potential solutions to that with geoengineering and the like. So it's not a lost cause. And the key to addressing that problem, like all of our problems, is to apply reason and science and humanistic values. I think it's important that we support journalism. I don't do this just here, Steve, for you. I say this everywhere. And we have an assault on the press, and I think that it's important for people to support journalism in all of its forms, but in particular in the forms that deal with investigative reporting. It's said that the news wants to be free, but free doesn't pay for doing the reporting and doing the investigation and doing the news. We saw a week and a half ago, the New York Times come out with a massive report that shows about how fraud and tax evasion was really very much the source of Donald Trump's wealth. And that type of, so there's a reason why he's calling, he's called all-out war on the New York Times and on the Washington Post. These are the major newspapers that are doing the type of reporting. So subscribe, support independent journalists as well. But it's not enough to stay up on the news. But I think if you're able to get a couple of subscriptions. Based upon what I talked about before on how to interact with Trump supporters, I really think it is necessary that we not cloister ourselves and only talk with people that we agree with. I think we need to get out there and interact with folks. And even in blue states like Connecticut and Rhode Island, there are plenty, and you guys know this, there are plenty of people who are supporters of Donald Trump. And I think that you really need to interact with them and get to understand them a little better. And I've suggested 2 books here that I think are really good if you at understanding their mindset. Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance and Deer Hunting with Jesus by Joe Badgian. Badgian by far is the funnier of the 2 books, if that's an influence, if you can only read one of the 2. But I think that they're both provocative. I don't agree with everything that either one of them says, but I think that they're both very provocative writers. We have an election coming up in just a few weeks, and obviously register, contribute, volunteer, and vote. It really does make a difference, and I'm not going to belabor the point beyond that. Raise some help. Raise your hand if you've gone to a rally sometime since Trump's become inaugurated. Okay. Almost everybody. And I think that that's good. I think that it's important to get out there. This is a photograph of some people in my group that were at the People's Climate March. Steve was there. I don't know if you're in the photo.
No, I didn't.
But Steve was here with us too. And
the other side of the camera.
The other side. Yeah. He might have taken that. You very well may have taken that picture. I don't know. But I also think that, this is a point where we're going to ask everybody to kind of listen up, because this is kind of the heart and the crux of the whole talk and the whole reason why I do it. It's very, very easy when you're looking at all the different problems and all of the different issues and all of the different outrages that are going on to bounce around from issue to issue to issue to issue, and you're not really making, and if you feel like you're not making much of a difference, it's because you're spreading yourself too thin. So I've got an ask for tonight, something I'm going to ask you to do. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to focus on one issue, 2 at the most. And I think I got to give you 2 because I'm doing 2 myself, actually. But focus on one issue where you can make a difference. Because if you pick one of these issues, and I just have climate, voters' rights, women's rights, immigration, racial justice, education, workers' rights, poverty, housing, hunger, consumer protection, civil liberties, LGBTQ rights. Pick one of them that's either particularly important to you, or you think you may have special skills or experience where you might make a difference. And then, that's step 1. Pick one issue. Here's step 2. Find a group that works on that issue. And this week, not next week, ideally tomorrow, contact them. See if you can get a live person on the phone and say, hey, I offer you my time, I offer you my money if you have some money, I offer you my experience, I offer you my wisdom, I offer you my energy, I offer you my enthusiasm, and my time, because I want to get involved with your organization. What can I do? And you might have to contact them more than once. You might have to do it more than once. But if you do that, if you get involved with one organization and you make a concerted effort, I promise you, you can make a difference in that organization. You can make a difference in that organization. Now, for me, it's consumer protection. Now, I don't think consumer protection is the most important issue on this list. I don't even think it's in the top 50%. It might be in the bottom 10%. But I've got special skills in consumer protection. I've got knowledge in consumer protection. This is an area where I know I can make a difference. So that's where I've committed myself. Okay. The other thing I do, I've been giving these talks around. So, you know, and trying to do this. Now, a few people made my day after I've given these talks, and this is the 9th time I've done it. One woman came up and she said, you know, thank you, I'm going to contact Blinn to prepare a trip tomorrow. I hugged her. That was great. There's somebody else I know who got involved in political campaigns. She is hosting on a regular basis phone call parties from her house where she's inviting people over and she's making calls. She was terrified to do it. She really doesn't like calling and talking to strangers. It's like sticking needles in her eye. But she figured this is something that I can do. And she's doing it on a regular basis. Even my parents, my dad's 86 and my mother's 81, and they go and they sit in front of Target and they sign up voters, the registered voters in Pennsylvania. So I don't care who you are. There's something here that you can do. There's an organization that would welcome your involvement and your participation and would welcome you. Now, what I say for individuals also goes to groups, and I'm going to make a suggestion to your group, which is that the issue that might be appropriate for you guys to focus on, Tony, is the separation of church and state, because this is something that you guys have specialized knowledge on. So if you're focusing on that, and because I do think that we can do better in groups in this community than we can individually, which is why I'm trying to direct you to go to a group. But we've got a group in a community right here. And again, some people may disagree with me. I don't think that's the most important issue, but it's important. It's important. And it might be something that that you think about as you set your priorities of what types of things you're going to work on.
I'm not happy about this next slide.
So, savor the things that are good. Now Leanne is there, you know, and she could see in the preview thing, she's known as I've been talking that this was coming. This was taken in South Carolina during the eclipse last summer. You know, enjoy yourself. It doesn't matter who's in the White House. You can still go outside and look up and enjoy the feel of the sunshine on your face. Okay, and continue to do that and savor that because you deserve it. And you're not going to be fighting the fight 24/7. You need to take time to recharge. So savor those things that are good. And I'm going to leave you with Albert Camus, who wrote The Plague, I think it's one of the great humanist novels that's been written. And for those that haven't read it, that aren't familiar with the plot, it's about, what it's really about is fascism, except the story is about a French Algerian town that's beset with the plague in the 20th century. And the narrator of the story is a doctor, Bernard Rieu, and he's trying to deal with this, and he's dealing with unspeakable death, and he's just trying to minister and care for and treat these people, most of whom are not going to recover, who are suffering terribly, and they're going to die. But he just keeps fighting it and fighting it and fighting it, and he digs in and he puts himself into that, and he finds that, again, if you think about Frankl, by putting yourself into something, having a purpose, that is how one can find fulfillment, even in the most bleakest of circumstances. And what he wrote is, what's true of all the evils in the world is true of plague as well. It helps us to rise above ourselves. Now, hopefully, someday this madness is going to be over. Maybe it won't. Maybe we're going to descend into something darker. But here's the thing, okay? You can't control the ultimate result of that. What you can control is what you do. And you do have the ability to make a difference. And regardless of how things turn out, 6 months from now, 6 years from now, 30 years from now, if you're able to look yourself in the mirror and say, I did what I could do. I worked, I fought the fight, and one should feel good about themselves because you have done what you can do. I showed you the photograph of me on November 8th, and I'm going to tell you the story of what happened to me the morning of November 9th. That's Wednesday, and I remember I took the day off, but I'm going back to work. And my Wednesday morning routine is the same then as it is now, which is I do a workout in the morning. And on the way there, I call my parents. And my dad, who I mentioned before, he's 86. I called, he answered the phone. And I said, good morning. And he answered, is it a good morning? Well, it's the morning that we have. So we might as well make the best of it. And then he gives the phone to my mom. She gets on the phone, she said, Danny, this morning I got up, and for the first time in 6 months I got on the scale. Because I'm going to start watching what I eat, I'm going to take care of myself, because I want to make damn sure I'm still here 4 years from now to vote that son of a bitch out of office. And that is verbatim what she said, actually. So, if she can do it, if he can do it, if I can do it, we all can do it. And really, it's what we need to do. So, I thank you. You've been very attentive during the entire time.